Each year, Bill and Melinda Gates release a letter to the world where they discuss different aspects of philanthropy. They also chart the progress being made in making the world a better place for all of humanity. In this year's letter, they take on 3 development myths. Why? Because they say these myths are undermining efforts to save lives and cut poverty. I sat down with Bill Gates to talk about that. I also got his thoughts on all of his philanthropic causes, efforts that are now his full-time focus since he stepped down from the helm at Microsoft in 2008. Mr. Gates, in your annual letter, you addressed 3 myths, and one of the ones that I found the most interesting was taking on terms. You say that these terms, developing countries and developed countries, they've outlived their usefulness. So how would you describe things?
Well, I think the World Bank categorization, where you have low income, middle income, high income, probably captures it best. And even there, you'll have some countries that have a lot of oil revenue that's not benefiting the people all that well. So that's still not a perfect classification system. And there's so many in middle income, you might even want to break that down. You know, India's just moved up to the low end of middle income. And you have other people like China, Brazil, who are at the upper edge there. But GDP per person captures it better than a simple adjective. The word developing would now include China and the Democratic Republic of Congo in the same categorization. And that can't be right. You know, you go to one, you go to the other, it's not the same world.
Right, right. Well, let me ask you about corruption is another thing that you bring up. And I thought your analysis of that and looking at corruption perhaps in Africa, but then comparing it to the U.S. state of Illinois, I thought that was an apt comparison. And I think people do tend to look at things through a different prism, don't they? Here in the West, they look at it one way, but oh, geez, our international aid, what a waste of money. Why is that, do you think?
Well, I think it's partly because people worry that in some cases you have extreme corruption, where all the money or half the money doesn't get to the intended recipients. And my message, my good news to people is that the aid programs now, that they're really intended to actually be aid programs. Historically, a lot of them were Cold War politics, you know, saying, okay, we want Mobutu, who ran Zaire, to be our friend. We called it aid, but that was just a euphemism. It was buying his loyalty. And so the fact that nothing magical happened for the citizens of that country, it's really no surprise. It wasn't conditioned on that. It wasn't managed in that way. Now that we're out of most of that, the aid really is being given and looking at, will this new vaccine save enough lives? Will it get out to all the kids here? And if not, you either go and fix it or you spend the money on something else. So aid has matured quite a lot.
And so there can't be, in your role, there can't be a great distance. I mean, I know you travel there quite a bit. I mean, you want your eyes there to say, okay, this really is working. That's a big part of it?
Yeah, and well, we have ambitious goals. Together with our partners, we want to take the number of children who die before the age of 5, which is 5% now. We want to bring that down to 1.6%. It was more than double, so we've cut it in half. You know, fastest reduction ever. We've got new vaccines coming along that will help us get that reduction, but it's quite an ambitious goal. So I want to go and see if countries getting ahead of the goal. You know, what are the best practices there? If a country like northern Nigeria is falling way behind, you know, why aren't the workers showing up? Why isn't the supply chain working? Why aren't the mothers showing up? How is it broken down, this basic primary health care system? And then we'll redirect our money and, you know, build better systems to bring the laggards up to the best practices.
You set ambitious goals, which may be the greatest understatement ever. You have like John F. Kennedy goals. I mean, it's like he says, we're going to put a man on the moon, and people sit there and go, oh my God. I'm wondering how you got there, because as a young kid, I've seen these pictures of you when you first started. You couldn't have said, oh, I'm going to be one of the richest guys in the world. I'm going to create this unbelievable corporation that's going to change everybody. And then I'm going to, after that, and I retire, I'm going to have this foundation that's just going to do all these great things. I mean, it can't start there. So give me the trajectory. How did you get to be who you are in that regard? Ambitious goals.
Well, I was very lucky. I went to a great school. You know, my parents talked a lot about the world. My dad was a lawyer. My mom was involved in local philanthropy. You know, they shared what they'd learned and how they organized things. The school was top-notch. Teachers, you know, got a kick out of the questions I asked and would challenge me. I have a habit of reading a lot, which I think is worthwhile. And computers came along. So I was one of the most avid at figuring out, okay, what is software? What can it do? Why are computers so expensive? And then the computer miracle, the microprocessor, gave us a new type of computer, the personal computer. And I created the first company that was writing software for those. We built a whole industry of companies writing software. The personal computer became this incredible tool. We connected them together. We got the internet. We got smaller devices, phones and tablets. And so the information revolution, I got to participate in that. My company, Microsoft, was one of the first movers.
I've heard of it.
Office, Windows, all those things. And so my ownership stake in Microsoft, to my surprise, became worth a huge amount of money. And once you decide that giving your children huge amounts of money is not great for them or society, then you think, okay, what are the philanthropic causes? What are the great injustices in the world? And can giving at a philanthropic level that's still very small compared to governmental level, can it be so catalytic? The same type of spirit of backing great scientists, thinking long term, being willing to make mistakes. A lot of what I learned at Microsoft is very applicable to this new area.
You talk about goals, but you also are really good at predictions. By 2035, there will be almost no poor countries left in the world. People have been going at this for a long time, a lot of bright people. What makes you so optimistic that, that this will get licked?
Well, we start several hundred years ago where everybody was poor. And at first, a small part of the world got rich. And in 1960, you could see there was a bulge of people in the rich world, and then the rest was poor, and not much in between. Now, since then, the good practices that brought the rich world up, education, infrastructure, seeds, medicine, stability, those have been adopted by lots of places. China, Mexico, Brazil, they're sort of exemplars because they were as poor as any country. China actually poorer than most. And yet by applying the latest industrial approaches, science, market-based pricing, what's happened is incredible there. So the question is, why should there be any country that doesn't participate? Yes, it's tough if you have a war. You've got to get stability. If you're a landlocked country in Africa, you've got malaria, parasitic diseases, tough geography. So they may lag. But my belief is that we'll have maybe less than 10 countries that are low income by that time. And of course, that means the donors can really focus in on the very toughest cases. And the line of progress, along with some innovation, suggests that it's not a crazy goal.
Writer David Lamb wrote for the LA Times as a bureau chief in Africa and wrote this book, The Africans, in 1983. And I went to Somalia in 93, and I read it, and one line from that book stays with you when you go in there. And the line was, in Africa, hope is an island in a sea of misery. And I saw the orphanages, and I saw the hospitals, and I saw the mass graves. And I know you've gone all over the continent. What haunts you about what you've seen? What drives you? What fuels this whole drive of yours to, bring prosperousness to these people?
When you have a statistic like 1 million kids died of malaria, it's almost less evocative than, if I showed you the picture of one kid and I handed it to you. And in fact, by going to Africa, you go into a ward and you'll see lots of kids there got cerebral malaria. Many of them, when you come back 24 hours later, have died. And yet we have, if we'd gotten to those kids early enough, if they'd used bed nets, if they'd had the medicines, they should survive. And the effect on diseases like that on how people's brains develop, how they develop physically, it really holds countries almost in a poverty trap. And so I think your dedication to these causes is always renewed when you go in and see it at the individual level. You meet a mom, whose kid is in that hospital, hoping that their child will survive. Now you still have to look at the statistics, because that gives you that broad picture. Nobody can go and visit the millions and add that up. And so the on the ground work, the scientific work, really the measurement things, all those come together to say that, wow, why isn't this being done? Why haven't we focused in on it? Why, was there nobody really funding malaria vaccine work before we came along?
There's been a lot of talk about the 1%, and I saw one story about you where they characterized you as only being concerned about the bottom 2 billion, which I thought was a nice way to characterize what you're up to. You and Warren Buffett have made a lot out of this giving pledge, but there's been some pushback. Did that surprise you?
Well, the giving pledge, which is people with substantial wealth agreeing to give over half of it and then getting together to share lessons of what's worked, mistakes. If they have common causes, they can work together, but we're not pooling money and endorsing anyone's causes over anyone else's. It's been amazing. We thought we'd get maybe 15 or 20 people. Now we're 122 people, 105 from the United States. We have a yearly get-together. It's very rich. I learn a lot every time I go. So I think it's going to get people to get involved younger when they can contribute more. I think it'll get them to be more generous. I'm certainly willing to share how much fun I'm having, and that it's not a dead end. There are causes out there that you can feel a pretty unique ownership of the wonderful things that you enable.
One final question, because we're just about out of times, but I said times, I meant time. The Economic Times, though, published the results of an international poll last week that listed you as the most admired person on the planet. And on the way over here, the cab driver, who's from India, I told him I was going to be interviewing you, and he said, I wish I could come up and meet him and just shake his hand and say thank you. I'm from India. For all the poor people, I'd like to say thank you to him. And he said, when people die, they can't go to heaven with all that money, but they can go to heaven with all those good deeds. You tell him he's going to heaven. Mike says so. I know that you probably hear stuff like this, and to see a poll like that has to make you feel good. But what about that? What does it say when people say something like that? I mean, here you are, a guy who could have done a million things after you retired, and to be cast in that light by a guy who's driving the streets of New York on this day, which isn't very easy. How does it make you feel?
Well, it's nice that I'm getting more credit than I deserve in something like that. There were an amazing number of people at Microsoft who did great work. The resources of the foundation, Warren Buffett, half of what we have comes from him. The people who devote their lives to working in the field in Africa are giving up stuff. I'm not giving up things. I, get to buy all the books and, do wonderful things. So real charity are those people who give up, part of their lives or give money that they would spend, to have a nicer vacation. If my example encourages people to be entrepreneurs, if it encourages them to be philanthropists, then certainly I feel good about that. I was surprised at the poll. A little bit, the American dream is very popular in India and China. So even in my Microsoft days, the visibility and the positive energy there was strong. And it's nice to see philanthropies at an earlier stage in those countries. When I'm over in both of them, I get to talk with some of the people starting in philanthropy and encourage them. I think it is an important movement, just like the technology movement. It's been huge for those countries as well. So I'd say I've been incredibly lucky, and I feel a sense of responsibility. And my wife and I, this is what we'll be doing the rest of our lives.